Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. This is not a reality show, but it does seem like we talk a lot about reality, suspending reality, navigating reality, avoiding reality, and sometimes dealing with reality. How fitting, our guest today even taught a course called Intro to Reality. Today we are talking to Jojo Ruba. Jojo is a Christian apologist from Calgary. He explains the Christian faith in ways non-Christians can understand and be challenged by. He's the executive director of Redeeming Conversations, a Christian communications ministry. You may find it difficult, awkward, or perhaps even frightening to speak about the reality of the gospel to those around you. But as Jojo points out, every aspect of reality points back to its creator. Jojo gives insights into how we can be ambassadors for Christ in everyday conversations, how we can prepare for these conversations, and embrace our calling to love those around us by engaging in meaningful dialogue. To learn more, head over to redeemingconversations.ca. Remember, this show and this episode in particular is not financial advice, but it is valuable for listening, amusement purposes. And now, Jojo Ruba.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. I'm your co-host, Mark. I'm here with Brent.
Hi, Mark.
Shuffling papers or something in the background. Thanks, Brent. And today we've got a guest for you folks. You don't just have to listen to us. And his name is Jojo Ruba. And Jojo comes to us from redeemingconversations.ca. Welcome, Jojo.
Glad to be here, guys.
Yeah. Glad to have you. So I heard you speak a couple of months ago. I think it was in Guelph. And I thought, you know what? We got to get this guy on the podcast. So here we are. So Jojo, why don't you tell us a little bit about Redeeming Conversations and how you guys got started, where you are now, and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So Redeeming Conversations is a Christian apologetics and conversations ministry. We help Christians engage on difficult topics in everyday conversations. And I love the title of your podcast about being stewards. And I believe when it comes to conversations, God has actually given us all kinds of opportunities to talk to people. And we need to steward that, to use those times and to make the best of those opportunities. And I say this as someone who struggles too, so don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect by any means. But I began to realize as I grew up in the church, as a pastor's kid, as a Christian, that really the ultimate task that we have is to be an ambassador for Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:20. Our task is to represent Jesus everywhere we go in the best way possible. And I'll quote him quite a bit, but one of my favorite apologists, a guy named Greg Koukl, and he says, we may be the only living Bible that someone will ever read. And he asks, what are they reading when they read us, when they meet us? And so I think that's part of the heart of what we do, Mark, to be able to say, what are we doing? How are we preparing for those conversations that we face every day? But also, how can we initiate and use those conversations to turn them into spiritual nuggets that people may need? Another phrase that Greg Koukl uses is, how do we put a pebble in someone's shoe? How do we leave a thought question so that when we're talking to someone, we may not be able to have the full time to share the message of the gospel or every aspect of it, but maybe we can leave them a thought, or maybe pull a rock or weed that's been blocking the seeds of the gospel from growing, and remove that so that maybe the next person, God in his good graces, will allow someone else to then build on what we've done before. As Paul says, some people water, some people plant, some people harvest, right? Each of us have a task to do in our conversations.
Aren't conversations antiquated? We just text now. I don't know. Everybody stands at the bus stop looking at their phone, right?
Well, there's some people, you're absolutely right, but there's some people that is the best way to have a conversation with them over text. I ran a youth ministry, and I'm still good friends with all of those young people. They've since stopped being kids, and they're now young adults. And sometimes the only way to engage with them is through a group chat or a individual chat, and just to encourage them that way. So absolutely, that's still part of our conversation training.
So, yeah, you said a couple interesting things there, and I guess maybe Greg Koukl said them, but the one about maybe being the only Bible that people ever read is you. And that's like, yeah, that's That's deep. But along with that, then I think a lot of Christians feel pressure when they speak to someone who's not a Christian to adequately explain the whole gospel and how it fits into this person's life in 30 seconds or less. And what you said about being the pebble in the shoe, I think takes some of that pressure off, because then often for myself anyways, I know like I just haven't said anything because I didn't want to screw it up and I didn't know how to give the whole message, in a nutshell. But I like that pebble in the shoe analogy. Is something
it goes hand in hand with another book he actually wrote, which I highly recommend if you've never read it before. It's called The Story of Reality. It's also by Greg Koukl. And I really love what his premise is, which is that as Christians, we often forget that the whole reality that we live in, the real world, is centered around a God who made us and loves us. And he's the one in charge. And that means every aspect of reality actually points back to its creator. There's something there that we can tie it back into because God is the one who rules it all. So, you're having a conversation on sports, for example, or politics. There's going to be some kind of thing there that ties it back to important truths that will help people engage or begin to think about conversations. So, for example, I remember, and this is a technique that I learned from Greg as well. When my buddy and I were at a restaurant and we were beginning to discuss theology, and we had some Bibles and books on the table. We learned the waitress's name was Susan, and we always ask, "What is your name?" Because it's a great way, again, to have a conversation. We don't want to just say, "Hey, you, we want more coffee," or "Hey, you forgot, the crackers in my soup," right? Kind of thing. But if we say, "Hey, Susan, great to meet you. Thanks so much for being our steward, our servant today, or our waiter." We got to know her as a person. We talked a little bit, and then we were able to say, "Hey, Susan, have you ever read a book with its main character is named Susan, has the same name as yours, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis?" And she said, "Oh yeah, no, I've read that book. It's a great book." And then we were able to say, "Well, have you ever read one of the other books he's written called Mere Christianity?" And in that book, he actually articulates a good reason for why we believe what we believe, so that we don't just believe randomly, but there's actually truth behind what we believe. And you know what she said? She said, "Oh, that's very interesting. I might want to pick that up because I love the Narnia books, but I've never heard the idea that we can actually be reasonable or rational about what we believe when it comes to religion. So I might want to take a look at that." And that all started because I learned Susan's name. Right? So that's one of the examples there. Little things like that we can pick up. Even with something like sports, you can talk about why are you so zealous about? Why are you so much for one team versus the other? Or wasn't that a great game? Don't you think that these athletes' bodies are so well designed? It's not just by accident that these people are skilled. They've had lots of practice. And it seems like when it comes to the way that our bodies function, as one of my doctor friends said, she's a general practitioner, it's so hard to look and study the human body and think this all came by accident. There has to be a plan behind it. What do you think about what my doctor said? So those are ways and conversations that you put in naturally. Again, I'm sorry, last time, hopefully I'm quoting Greg, but Greg Koukl says we can have these conversations without sounding spiritually weird. And I think part of the challenge, guys, is that too many times as Christians, we only talk to each other and we don't take the time to talk to people outside our churches. 90% or so of Christians in Canada today are like myself, who grew up in the church. I'm a pastor's kid. So I grew up having a Christian worldview taught to me from the very beginning. And we weren't really given an opportunity to think through, well, what do people outside think? Or how do other people outside the church define things like truth or Bible or steward? Well, what does that mean to be a servant according to the world, right? And so part of being an ambassador means learning to translate what we believe in a way that the people outside the church can understand what we believe. I think those are key traits that we have to start practicing in our churches. And it'd be as simple as, what is the waitress's name?
So you touched on something there that we talk about a lot, which is reality and truth. And
Yes.
often we're doing that in a fiscal context, like, we're we're spending imaginary money in dollars, but there's a broader cultural context as well, right? Which directly relates back to that fiscal example. But how do you approach the concept of truth with people? Because a lot of people don't understand what truth is or don't believe that there is truth anymore, right? That everything is subjective to my feelings. And so sometimes I've run into that when I'm talking to people about, that objective reality or, the universe. If there is truth, then where does truth come from? But if people don't believe that there's truth, how do you approach that in 30 seconds or less?
That's often, and Mark, that's a great question, and because it's often the starting point for conversations in particularly places like the Western world, and particularly places like Canada, because we've been raising a generation whose moral standards no longer come from Scripture, but come from themselves. And if you throw out objective truth, which we've done so in a moralistic way, and explain what that means, what you have left to determine how you should behave is how you feel. So feelings now determine what's right and wrong. See, the problem is that we have thrown out objective truth, particularly biblical truth, because we think we're better than that. We know better than that because we don't want to offend people. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want to be able to say we're better than you because we know truth. But all of those statements that I've just said are based on an objective standard themselves, right? And it's not just how we feel. It's to be able to say they assume that it's wrong to offend someone objectively. See, that's the problem, right? It's wrong to say that you're better than someone else objectively, and again, so they're relying on the very thing that they're throwing out. Right. It's a contradiction to say there's no such thing as truth. Here's a question again we can just ask when someone says that: is that true that there's no such thing? And get them to think about it. And I've seen this happen so many times, guys, when people are like they're confused because they've never been challenged that way, and then they would say something like, "Oh, well, there's no such thing as truth except this one statement." Well. Really? Because that seems to imply that you know objective truth and no one else does, right? So you're the one being arrogant. You're the one who thinks you know better than that. And so part of it is understanding this. As Christians, again, we believe Christianity is the story of reality. We believe that's how it works. Okay? And because it works this way, when Christianity explains something, it will actually be consistent with reality. And when a worldview contradicts Christianity, it will actually contradict reality. It will actually contradict itself. And so I point this out as part of my course. We actually teach a course called Intro to Reality based on Greg Koukle's books and other people's books. And the first lesson we teach is what is truth, because we believe the Bible. Obviously, the Bible is true, but for the culture we live in, often, if we start with Scripture, they will just like you said, Mark, they will dismiss it as, oh, that's just true for you. So for most people nowadays in Canada, we need to start off with two lessons: an explanation of truth and why truth matters, why it actually is a good thing to believe in truth. So those two things. And a simple explanation that I give, guys, when it comes to truth is my GPS system. All right, so I remember, I'm old enough. When I first got my iPhone, I was so excited. Apple had their own mapping system as part of the phone, right? And if you recall, that mapping system, they wanted, or actually Apple was using Google at the time, I'm sorry, but then they wanted their own mapping system. So they got rid of Google and added theirs as sort of the default mapping system, and it was a huge catastrophe. In fact, Apple fired the CEO in charge of that mapping system because it was sending people literally to drive through a lake or over a cliff or go through an ocean, right? Because the mapping system didn't figure this all out when they first released it. And so we realized right away a GPS system only works, a global positioning system only works if it accurately describes reality. right? And I'm pretty sure there's still some problems with that mapping system. I still get lost with my GPS sometimes, even in my own city, right? Why? Because the roads, the reality that we live in, don't match the mapping system. And that's the reason why your worldview is like a GPS. If your GPS is accurate, if your worldview is accurate, how you understand how the world works, it will help you navigate and not get lost. Right? This is the key Christian teaching, that we follow Jesus' teachings because it helps us not get lost. And we are actually able to use the time we have to live in this world. And here's the thing about evangelism then. We're actually inviting people to reject the delusion that they live in and to enter reality. Just think about that. When we invite people to share and understand a biblical worldview, we're actually like a guy on the side of the street or a police officer who's saying, hey, this is the wrong way. You have to go this way. In British Columbia a few years ago, there was a holiday season, and a lot of Albertans go to BC for the holiday and then come back to Alberta, to Calgary or Edmonton, and they were taking a road back. And on the way back, there was a side road that the Google Maps was telling them that they could take and go around the traffic, because there was a lot of traffic, of course, driving back. And so all these people went on this side road, and it turned out to be an old logging road that had a dead end. Okay? So they all had to turn around and go back to the very spot that they thought they could bypass the traffic and start all over again. It was horrible. So just imagine, though, how grateful these people would be, these drivers would be, if someone stood on the side of the road or wrote a little letter or a note that simply said, wrong way, Google Maps is wrong, continue on this road. That's the Christian who's telling people truth. That's the Christian telling people about reality, about a Christian worldview that explains how reality is. And I think if we recognize that, guys, if you understand that, then we also see that in the case that we need to make for people nowadays, Mark, is that we want to be able to show that the biblical worldview is also good. It's not just the fact. It's not just the truth. We need to, as Christians, and Jesus did this brilliantly, right? Because as John describes him, he was full of grace and truth. And so should we. So we need to not just argue for the facts of what we believe, to say, no, what we believe actually leads to you not being lost and not losing 3 hours because you got off on a side road. And that's what Jesus does. It's not just believe these facts for the sake of the facts. Believe these facts because it gives you eternal life.
So these conversations that people have every day, and you're kind of making the point that, okay, it's not just inside of our Christian community relationships we have inside the church. Mm-hmm. It's having meaningful conversations with people that you meet in outside of the church community. Maybe tell us a little bit about like the dynamics of speaking and listening and like getting to these topics. Is it, you often hear like, oh, I have to build a relationship with someone before I start addressing some of these deeper matters of truth? Or is it like, are there ways to kind of jump right into things and be the rock in people's shoe?
Pebble, Brent, pebble.
A pebble.
Pebble, yeah, you don't want to beat a person. You want to put a again, the question is, it depends. It depends who you're interacting with, how much time do you have. For example, I often try to pray for the person that I'm sitting beside on the airplane, because I know I have a limited amount of time with this person. I don't know if I will even get a chance to talk to this person. Maybe they'll put on their headphones and they'll just not talk to you. Or one time I had arrived on a plane late. So our plane had landed, and the place I was staying was already closed. I had nowhere to go. But thankfully, the person sitting next to me was a Christian lady who I had a conversation. We began to talk, and it turns out we knew all these people, mutual people, and that family let me stay at their house overnight until I could go back to where I was staying the day before. And I'm still in contact with them. They're a great couple. Right. And that's my point, is you never know these opportunities. I think the key, Brent, is to be able to understand that when we're in conversations, and again, back to your name, I love your name, is about service. It's not just about getting the agenda that I want to bring into a conversation. It's being able to say, how do I serve best the person that I'm with? And there's a quick prayer. I will warn you, it's the most dangerous prayer you can probably pray, right? Is, Lord, show me how to love this person right now. What does that love look like? And this goes back to what I said earlier about how we often don't understand how people define terms, but the word love in particular is, even in the church, we forget what love looks like, right? C.S. Lewis defines love as giving or desiring the best for the other person and being able to say, what is this best thing that this person needs right now? So, for example, this person next to me, she might need to take a nap if she's on the plane and she's too tired, and me interrupting her and saying, hey, what's your spiritual truth today? Like, that may not be the most loving thing to do, right? So that's what I mean. You're thoughtful about what the person needs. But I really appreciate how Jesus handled the story of the rich young ruler, some people say, in Mark, when he tells the young man to sell everything he had and then come follow me. Remember that? But Mark, in particular, mentions in that gospel, just before Jesus says this thing, Mark says, Jesus looked at him and loved him, and then said the very thing that would offend him and make him walk away upset. Right? And I always think about that, because as Christians, we have this mindset that successful engagement means the person is our friend. He likes us. Like you said, Brent, we have to build this relationship. Well, Jesus didn't have time for that. In fact, at the beginning of Mark, it actually describes he was preparing for a journey, to go on a journey. And I don't know about you guys, but when I'm traveling, when I'm getting ready to travel, it's chaos. I have to put everything and make sure I don't forget anything. And I always manage to forget one thing. That's the problem. I even have my checklist. I go through it. I still forget one thing. So I don't have.
As long as it's not the truth or reality, I think you're good.
You can't escape that. You can pretend. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I one time I was on my way to a presentation, and then once I got to the church, thankfully it was in the same city. It was, but I realized I forgot my laptop back home. I had to send someone to get it, right? So this is the whole point, right? But Jesus is so just brilliant, obviously, in taking the time and not complaining. Hey, I'm too busy, man, go away. But taking this young guy's question about what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus knows that he's just trying to justify himself. Actually, I think Matthew's version says that. But in terms of this passage, he takes the time to say the very thing the young man needed to hear, because Christ's motivation was to be a steward of that time, to take advantage of that conversation. And if we have that mindset, guys, that's what's going to change the world. In fact, there's another book by a Christian historian named Larry Hurtado. He wrote a book called Destroyer of the Gods. And he asked a simple question: why did the early church grow so fast in the very city, Jerusalem, where they would have been easily wiped out, easily persecuted, and proven wrong? They could have just said, hey, here's the tomb, there's the body, there's no resurrection. You guys are nuts, right? And in fact, at that time, the majority of the church were women and slaves, because they had the least to lose in reputation, in being able to find a job, if they converted to Christianity, right? So this was the Christian faith back then. These are the people there. They didn't have fancy pews or beautiful buildings or Christian radio stations, TV stations. But what did they have? They had two things. Larry Hurtado, the historian, writes, they had the truth of the eyewitness accounts, right? If you're walking around and you talk to Jesus and you have lunch with him, tomorrow, right? You after he's been crucified and killed, you can't deny the resurrection. It's sort of a fact, right? It's because you're there. And if your family engaged this way, if your great grandfather, for example, saw Jesus die, and then know that he hang out with your family, had fish and bread with them or whatever, you're not going to deny that. That's the truth of the eyewitnesses. And secondly, Larry points out they had the love of Christ that no other community could offer. As Christians, we're often taught it was Christians who rescued babies who were abandoned in the forest during the Roman Empire. But Larry points out in some states, in the Roman states, this was actually a capital offense. You could be killed for rescuing a baby left abandoned in the forest. Okay? But more than that, 80% of these babies were girls. So just think about it. 20 years later, in a small Roman town, if you want your son to get married, and you're eligible bachelor, the only bachelorettes would be the Christian ladies. So literally they had to flirt to convert, right? So that's how the church grew naturally. Why? Because they lived out a biblical worldview. And then I would add this. They shared that truth. They showed that love in everyday conversations. Whether they were living in the household of Caesar, whether at the marketplace or at home. Many Roman homes would have Roman gods that you would have to pray as a household to. And so if you became a Christian, you would need to be able to explain to your family why you didn't show up to their daily worship of their household gods. And you would need to be able to explain that in conversation. So we begin to see here there's a pattern, especially in pagan times, when the culture is against us. We can create all kinds of programs, or we can create all kinds of wonderful TV shows and movies. And I'm not saying those are things that are wrong, but those things are based on whether or not we can have a conversation with our neighbor across the street, or the person we work with, or our colleague, or our classmate. And I think that's where the focus of the church and Christian ministry should be on our conversations.
It almost seems like there's two kind of problems. Like one is, we're just in our culture, we're not having as many problems as problems. We're not having as many conversations in general as we should. Just not interacting with fellow human beings. Maybe that's just like a societal thing that we've kind of lost. And then the second is, okay, well, the conversations you do get into, maybe we're just not prepared as Christians, or not as prepared as we should be, not thinking about this sort of thing. So the first problem on like dealing with just, the lack of interaction we have with our fellow human beings. Like, do you have any kind of insight on that? How to strike up conversation, or like, is this something we should be seeking out, or just like kind of wait?
Without seeming like a weirdo.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
He's just trying to talk to me all the time.
I like the fact that you guys started in real estate, because I have a buddy here in real estate, one of the best real estate agents here in Calgary. And he always models this for us. Well, when he was helping with friends who were trying to sell their house, he realized as a real estate agent, you're not just selling a house, right? You're selling a future for someone. You're selling a place where they can connect. They're able to say, I know I can find my place here. You're the biggest investment for yourself. And so you want to be able to engage them at that level, not just you have to pay all this money for this property, but this is where you can have your kids grow. You'll be able to be near a school if you have family, or if you're retiring, you're downsizing, right? You're able to remodel, or you want something that's ready to go. Like you're just able to get in, and everything's already set up. So that's the same thing. People are in all kinds of places in life, right? And so we want to be able to, first of all, find that person who's willing to have those conversations, who's already sensitive to that. I love what Jesus did when he sent his disciples 2 by 2 in the Gospels. He says, go find the man or woman of peace in each town, and start with that person. So all of us have interests, have skills, have talents that overlap with other people, right? Maybe you're not a Taylor Swift fan, but there are Swifties out there who need to hear the gospel. And that person, if you're a Swiftie, maybe that's where you can connect and begin that conversation. Or if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, and God bless you if you are, because you need a lot of prayer, right? You may have that, but you want to be able to connect with other people on that level. Maybe just as someone who loves hockey too. Right. And God has given us all of these opportunities, Brent, to just make those human connections. But I think that the key here is this, is what I said with real estate agent. You think through, what is this person like? What does this person actually need? How do I serve as a steward, right? As a servant. That's what you need to think of this way as well with the people you talk to. And what I find is when I have that heart, that question, how do I love this person right now, Lord? That gives me a whole new perspective on how to have that conversation with that person. Right. So I remember that we actually I did a lot of work doing in pro-life work, and we would have very difficult conversations on abortion and euthanasia and these really tough topics, because as Christians, we have to be able to talk about the tough topics. And what was amazing was, even though these are tough topics, we got a brilliant chance to talk to people who want to talk about these tough topics, even if they were there to protest us and hate on us. So I remember I had a conversation with this person, one of the students I was working with. She brought him over and she's like, this guy's a big philosopher guy, and he's really talking big words, and he doesn't make any sense. So he should talk to Jojo, because Jojo can handle it. And I'm like, great. And we started talking, and though we started about abortion, where I brought it to, where do we get right and wrong from? Where do we get human value from, or human rights? And again, Brendan, you notice I phrase it as a question first, because I'm trying to get to know where this person is at. And it was fascinating, because as soon as I started getting into those topics, all of his pro-abortion arguments, I could take down. Like, it was pretty easy. I've done this for a living. So we were able to do that. But we did it in a way where every idea, he knew he was being challenged. And he'd never heard a biblical challenge like that before, because we were having thoughtful conversations. He was a man of peace. He wanted those conversations. And at the end of it, it was great. He said, I have to go back to class, but I want to come back and talk to you. So he ran, came back to class, and then came back, and he said, I told my buddy I was coming back to talk to you. He wouldn't believe me, because I thought it was a waste of time, but I'm learning so much, basically. and then we were able to talk a little bit about God, because obviously as Christians, we know that if we believe in objective moral laws, there has to be an objective moral law giver. There has to be an objective standard. An example I use, right? If you see a stop sign on the side of the road, what do you do if you're driving? Well, you stop. Unless you realize the stop sign was made by a little kid, in crayon, and she just wanted to put it on the side of the road. Why? Because a real stop sign was created by a government agency, usually your city, that has the power to give you a $400 fine, which is what it is here in Calgary. And don't you ask me why I know that.
How do you know that, Jojo?
Don't ask me why I know that. But if it was
you got confronted with reality right there.
But if it was made by a little kid, she has no authority over you. And so you don't have to follow that rule. So here's a little, like when we started, here's a little basic factoid that helps us understand, because this is God's reality, these conversations are helpful, because we can point people back to that. And the end of it was amazing. This young man basically said, it was really good talking to you, and I'm really appreciative of the fact that you can answer all my questions. And that goes to the last part, Brent, of what you said. We need to take time to prepare as Christians. So, for example, if at your church, if you have a Wednesday afternoon Bible study or a Sunday night service, why not talk to your pastor about taking the time to go through scenarios and conversations that you may have on some tough issues? And I'd be happy to talk to your ministry or your pastors about this if they want, if they want to contact us and say, hey, can we watch a news clip, or watch a clip from a movie, or see a conversation scenario, and help us walk through how to handle that situation. So I do this a lot on LGBTQ conversations, and say, well, what if your grandson comes out as transgender, or your best friend's wife, leaves him and for another woman? How would you handle that conversation? And you walk through how we can model Christ. We don't hate anyone. We love everybody, right? We're supposed to. But we need to be able to ask, what does love look like in that conversation? And sometimes, like Jesus, we have to say the very thing that offends people, right? And that's because we love them. The challenge is not often what we say, but why we say the things we do, right? And so if we recognize this, and this is what's key, you're now having an orientation towards other people. And that's where really most Christians need to start. You need to want to be a steward first. And if we can encourage people to do that, the next parts were a lot easier.
Yeah, you are the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. You could just, if you're trying to present or be an ambassador for Christ, then you're, having a conversation with somebody, what would Jesus say to this person? And I guess like you kind of alluded to it, like preparing yourself. And I'm assuming that means like, studying the word, being active, and then the example of maybe getting your pastor to do some stuff, but like role play or trying to practice stuff. Yeah. I just know for my own life, like I do a lot of tenant placement showings as well. And you get pretty good at the kind of standard interaction with a tenant, right? It's someone you never really met before. Right. And you say the things you need to, and then you can kind of navigate any questions. But yeah, if all of a sudden an issue like abortion came up, like, okay, shoot, I haven't had that conversation for a while. I'd have to kind of rehash all the points. And but if I just did it every week, I would know.
Well, I think the other advantage too that we have is we have social media now. We have Facebook, Twitter, X, YouTube. You have all these opportunities. And even if you can't or don't want to engage in a conversation, oftentimes you have Facebook groups that have debate groups, like debating God or debating abortion. You should join those and just follow the conversation. Find some good people that you want to model after. Like you see that they're handling these things well, and just follow them. Go to their Twitter account or X account, and their Facebook account, and follow what they're saying and how they phrase things. There's some great Christian apologists that we work with. I just did a podcast with Sean McDowell, who is a professor at Biola University, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. One of their programs is an apologetics program. And he wrote a book called End the Stalemate with a communications professor from the university. And what they do with that book is they actually lay out some conversations techniques and tactics they can use. But he also models it well on his YouTube channel, where he talks to all kinds of people with all kinds of different and often strange, let's just admit, worldviews. And so you have this opportunity now, Brent, to actually practice alongside experts online. And even if you devote, one podcast a week, doing that, listening to these experts or practicing yourself, following through conversations, it's a great opportunity. And here's the thing, for us, for me, but I'm sure most people, some of the times the people you love the most, like family members or good friends, are the people that are hardest to talk to about faith. And so that requires a lot of prayer, spending a lot of time praying for these people by name, making sure you ask God for wisdom to either be available when a conversation comes or to open up a conversation. But like you said, these things are not, you can't pre-plan everything, so you need to prepare. And I think that's why it's critical to see yourself as an ambassador 24/7.
Yeah, I think that's a critical part of it is the preparation. Right? People are often, some people will say anyways, like, theology is not that important. Like, just love people and show love, and love is, love is important, 100%. But if you don't know what you're talking about, then you have nothing to talk about, right? And I mean, like you mentioned, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Obviously, the Bible's our starting point, but there's so many great resources, like you said. Sean McDowell podcast. There's so much more information out there now for people to take advantage of and to learn from than I don't know, maybe you had like the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress, and those were your go-to books. We have a lot more. Sorry, I was just listening to a recap of Little Women, and this is very off topic, but I guess Pilgrim's Progress was like the second most read book in sort of the Western world for a great time. And, it's good, but I'm glad we have more resources now.
Well, I think the other half of that, the parallel to that, Mark, is that the world around has all kinds of resources too. And unfortunately, online, you can pass on all kinds of ideas that have been debunked, have shown that it's false 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and it gets resurrected literally on the internet. So, for example, a lot of the arguments online in atheist circles are arguing that Jesus never existed, or that Jesus came about from ancient Egyptian religions. I just saw another video, very sophisticated, very well produced, trying to argue that Christians copied the story of Jesus and his resurrection from ancient pagan religions. But this was debunked 50, 100, 150 years ago. Because what actually happened was these ancient religions lost all their followers to Christianity. So they started incorporating Christian teachings in their religion. And now they're these experts, quote unquote, are trying to say it's the opposite, right? So this is the kind of stuff that's out there. So if you're not prepared for that, it isn't just that you're not prepared to engage and give hope and give truth and reason for why we believe. You may fall captive to these ideas. And I've seen that happen so many times, guys, where we have celebrity Christians, musicians and actors who have a public announcement about them losing their faith because instead of engaging in conversations to help people, atheists and others had conversations with them that they were not prepared for. And it's so easily debunked. It's so sad. There's a guy named Wes Huff. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he just recently did a podcast, right, with Joe Rogan after engaging with this guy who's claimed to be an expert on biblical historical books. And he was quoting all of these things in such wrong ways. He was actually quoting books that even the hardcore atheist said was written in the 19th century. Right. It wasn't an ancient book. It wasn't even a book written at the time of Jesus. This is like modern forgeries. And he was quoting them as if they were real to justify the belief that the resurrection never happened. And Wes, being a biblical expert, was able to say, no, here's this, and this, and was able to just completely wipe the floor with him to the point he got invited to the largest audience of a podcast in the world, right? Because he did this. So it doesn't mean we have to be a scholar like Wes, but we should be aware of that because the ideas out there, and it just floors me still how ridiculous these ideas were, yet this guy had hundreds of thousands of followers, apparently, the guy promoting these ideas. And none of these people were able to actually study the facts in a way where they could be refuted. And Wes was getting emails saying your scholarship, that conversation completely blew me away, and now I have to reconsider the Bible again. That's the life change that God can use in our conversations.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that was that was I found that very interesting that Joe Rogan actually had him on. And like encouraging too. I mean, and this is, it seems like the further away as a society that we get from the truth, the more opportunity there is for Christianity. You know, you brought up ancient Rome, which I love because I try to get one reference in every podcast.
Wasn't there that thing about women thinking that men think about ancient Rome at least once a week or something like that? That's social media, right? That's social media.
What's he thinking about? I bet he's thinking about other women. I wonder what kind of armor they had in the late Roman Republic. Totally true. But where was it? Oh, yeah. And just, you know, how it spread. And because you had such a stark contrast of ideas. And, you know, I find the hardest conversations I have are with people who are sort of have Christian values, and they're like, you know, like, we have that foundation and that's great, but I'm basically a good person. And, you know, trying to get the idea of sin across to them, that's really hard. But someone who has almost no grounding in, like, many people who have never read, like you said, never read the Bible. You're the only Bible they read, which still kind of blows me away, right? In Canada, but yeah, we're a post-Christian society and a nation, and it's almost easier now. We had a pastor on a while ago, and he's a Bitcoin guy, but one of his taglines is that he's ministering to the pagan tribes of Canada. You know, and I saw that and I'm like, that's a little hokey. And then I thought about it. I'm like, no, it's kind of true because paganism, well, like you said, paganism is on the rise, right? And, you know, Jesus is a representation of Mithras or whatever, or so many different. So yeah, you're right. Lots of information out there on Christianity, but lots of information about other things as well. And then people feel like they found something. And so we need to know Yeah, it's overwhelming is what I'm saying, Jojo. So thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it too. Is excuse me, when you have so much information, you actually have little information for most people because they're just overwhelmed, or they only go to trusted sources. So they only talk to the people or go to the websites of those they already agree with, and they don't actually engage with people outside that bubble. And I see that all the time when we're doing talks on pro-life, on abortion. I remember I was speaking at the University of Victoria, and during Q&A, one young man insisted that I must be against birth control because the only pro-life people he met were Catholics, and they're all against birth control. And I'm like, well, our organization doesn't take a stand on this. He didn't believe me when I explained this in front of 300 people in his school, because he didn't understand Christian theology and the differences between Catholicism and evangelicalism or Protestantism. And that's the kind of mindset that we're dealing with. The other half of that, guys, in terms of going back to Rome, is that there are also awful things in Rome as well. And I think we're cycling back to that. We see that in euthanasia and abortion, human sacrifice, right? That we kill our elderly or our weak. But also remember, when you have a culture with pagan ideals and ideas, the Christian worldview is dangerous. And what did they do with people with Christian worldviews? They killed them. They persecuted them. Why? Because they refused to kneel to the emperor of the day. And so we need to recognize that that's what's happening now. I don't know if you guys have talked about it yet. It would be an interesting conversation. But in the province of Quebec, they have a secularization law that tries to make everything secular as a reaction to the Catholic Church's excesses in the province. And even if there were a lot of abuses, we have to recognize this is not a good sign when the Premier of Quebec says they want to ban public prayer in any kind of streets and parks, in potentially restaurants, and find people who are praying. And this was in reaction to a group of Muslims taking over public schools in Montreal. Now, I don't think any religion should take over public schools, of course, but this is a huge overreaction. And as Christians, we need to see this as a result of us not engaging in conversations, because the Premier of Quebec doesn't seem to understand that the Christian worldview, even though he claims to be Catholic, is not a worldview that it can just live in our homes and in our churches. It's a worldview that says every part of reality belongs to Christ. And that means we should be free to have those conversations. Freedom of religion not just protects Christians, but protects society. Because once you start regulating what people can believe and where they can practice on religion, you can do that on anything, right? You can do that on business. You can do that in real estate, right? And we shouldn't have to have government do that kind of stuff. So as Christians, we need to recognize if we're not going to be engaging in conversations, and back to your point earlier, Brent, someone else will fill that vacuum. And unfortunately, that person will not be living and seeing the reality that we actually are in, and will be imposing laws that will restrict our right to share people, to invite people to enter reality. So
let me ask you something, Joe. I don't know. You can answer this if you want or how you want, but no, you've referred to, the role of government and what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And, I've got some strong views on that. Basically my view is that government should be as small as possible, and it should exist to serve justice and to protect property rights. And I'm also even against the idea of having, a Christian government, right? You hear about Christian nationalists, right? And I'm in favor of having a government with a Christian basis, but, where do you see the role of government? One of the things you mentioned, I think at your talk last time as well, is that, there's a subset of people, and I think women in particular, maybe middle-aged women. I don't know. I just picture cat ladies, but that's not a fair characterization. But for people, and not just women, but people for whom the government is either their father or their husband, because the government completely takes care of them, provides everything they need. So there is no need for sort of the traditional family unit. And,
Right.
to me, that's just an example of overreach, and I'll go on and on about that. But just interested to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Well, there are several ways we can look at it. But, as a Christian, let's just start with that. And I think it's important to remember, if we're talking about the story of reality as Christians, then what we believe matches every aspect of reality, whether it's economic reality or political reality, whether it's social reality. Because if God designed us a certain kind of way and showed us how to live through Scripture, then when we live according to those principles, we will actually flourish as human beings. And you don't have to be a Christian to know that these biblical principles will help you. So going back to Jeremiah 29, when the people of Jerusalem have just been conquered by Babylon, and they are brought to Babylon, they're taken captive and forced to live there. And they're ready for God to tell them to move back, or that God will bring them back and restore Jerusalem. But Jeremiah's message isn't that at all. He says, you are to live in Babylon for 70 years, which for most of them was a death sentence, which meant you are forced to live here. There's no hope of leaving. You're going to live in a pagan land. And there's three things that they're told to do when they live in the pagan land. First, they need to pray for the peace of their city. And I think that gives a great foundation, Mark, to be able to remember government is there because God has placed it there. And we have a responsibility as believers in that pagan land to pray for the city, to pray for its welfare. Because the second thing is, it says, when you seek the welfare of your city, you also seek the welfare of yourself. If you want to flourish, you want to be able to have the city you live in flourish as well. So that means when we contribute to society, we need to seek its common good. We need to advocate for values that everyone benefits from. And the reason why I start here, Mark, is oftentimes we make our conservative argument about the role of government, the role of society, the role of business, taxation, all of these things objectively, and especially as guys, right? We think this way. We want to solve the problem. Here are solutions. Here's the thing. But we often forget that God gives us these principles that lead to good things because they are truth that leads to goodness. They're principles that we can live by that allow for human flourishing. And so oftentimes in political debates, and I've seen this, I actually studied political science as part of my time in university. As conservatives, we argue for the objective truth, assuming that if we can just convince someone that something is true, they'll change their mind and they'll agree with us. But oftentimes they've already agreed with us if they're conservative. The people we're trying to talk to are liberals. And here's the thing. Often those people who consider themselves centrists or liberals, they're women who have a heart that says they want to do good, they want to help people. And I don't want to take anything away from that. That's a good thing. But in political dialogue, we have now translated helping people with government program. So when I was in journalism school, we would be sent out to do a story. And it was implicit. It was never explicit, at least 20 years ago. But we would be doing a story, and the answer or the question would be asking at the end. The answer would be looking for is, well, what is the government doing about it? And I didn't think about that until I left journalism school, that this is the mindset that we're giving young people, we're giving young adults, that in order to solve a problem, the government has to fix it.
Wait, that was the final question you always had to ask when you were.
That was the implicit, like, because if we did a story, right? There's too much taxes, or there is this crime wave, right? And we do a story, and then we interview the victim, we interview the police officer, and then the final thing would say, well, what did the government do about that? We haven't heard from them yet, or something like that. So it always seemed to involve a question where we would say, why can't the government fix this? And so as conservatives, we're stuck in this loop because the left and other people are arguing, well, no, they're all focused on what the government solution is, instead of saying, well, what is the best solution to solve the problem? So let me give a quick example right now in terms of the debate. the CBC was created in Canada to promote Canadian culture in light of the American dominance of media, right? And so the conservatives right now are arguing we don't need the English CBC. And the left are saying, well, no, we need to protect Canadian culture. We need to protect Canadian values. You see, there's a disconnect. As conservatives, we can still agree that we need to protect Canadian culture, and we need to protect Canadian ideas and speakers and things like that. But we need to be able to agree with that principle, but also ask, is public funding for $1 billion for a national broadcaster the best solution for that, especially when they only propagate certain kinds of ideas that a lot of Canadians don't agree with, right? Or can we invest that $1 billion into Canadian producers? Or can we invest it into to cut taxes so that people can freely produce things on YouTube, or make internet access more accessible so people can put things up? Those are the kinds of ways we can address those ideas and agree with good principles, but offer non-governmental responses, because these non-governmental responses actually offer a better solution. All right. So going to your question on welfare and care, we have the majority of single women, particularly African-American single women in the U.S., are living below the poverty line, often get government assistance. We all know people now in Canada who have disabilities and who don't work, because why? They can live without having to work. And those are the question we need to ask is, well, how much money are we throwing at them? What a waste. But is that the best way to help these people? Again, going back to conversation training, asking those good questions, is the best way to help someone with a psychiatric problem, offering government assistance for the rest of their life? Or is there something that they can contribute to society? Ways we can help encourage them to be able to use the time they have for good, not only for society, but for themselves. And what would that look like? What partnerships can we have with private industry, with charities, with nonprofit groups, with churches, right? Because churches do a lot of this stuff. And so when you engage in these topics, Mark, oftentimes what we need to be able to do in conversation is start by agreeing that we want to help people. We want to care for people. But we need to convince and show the people we're speaking to that compassion and care is not a government program.
Yeah, it's where does the responsibility lie? Like, if we're walking around in our lives saying the government's responsible for that, you see this person on the street and you know what, the government will take care of that person, or and then can you walk around instead and having the mindset, like in my conversations, I'm responsible.
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
I'm gonna do what I can to show love to this person, and interesting.
But another example here, so Albertans are very resentful of this, and I've since lived in Alberta now for 20 years or so. So I'm more sensitive than when I was living in Ottawa. But we subsidize certain provinces so they can get $10 a day daycare, right? Yeah. And everyone says, if you don't support $10 a day daycare, you are against women working, you're against women, you're against fundamental rights. You see, all of the moral arguments are thrown in this, and a lot of people are convinced by this. But as conservatives, we need to be able to have a conversation to say, again, well, what is the best way to help and support people who have double incomes, or who have to work 2 jobs because everything is so expensive, or women who are living on their own, maybe they're single moms. And to start off with saying, we want to find a solution to that. But maybe the solution is to decrease taxes so that more people can choose to work from home or stay as homemakers. And so they don't need $10 a day daycare, because one of the spouses is actually at home doing the work that C.S. Lewis says is the most important work in society, right? So those are the kinds of ways we need to be able to argue, to point out we actually are more compassionate. We actually are more thoughtful in the situations that single women are in, or single moms are in. Why? Because we want solutions that are long lasting. Ronald Reagan was one, I think, who said the best welfare program is a good job. And I think as conservatives, we need to come back to that mindset, Mark, because we've let the debate go on for so long to think about what is the government solution. That's what we always go back to, instead of what is the best solution for society. Because that's the third point, actually, that Jeremiah said to the people of Jerusalem, right? Pray for the peace of your city, seek its common good, and then to thrive. Christians have to multiply, because as we multiply, as we bring this common good, we bless at the society that we're living in. That society will grow stronger because its principles are based on reality. And here's the key point. And Christian, people who argue this in secular society, it just frustrates me to no end. You don't have to be a Christian to live in a society blessed by Christians. As Christians, we do not want to impose Christianity on you. Why is that? Because Christianity is something you need to freely decide to follow Jesus on your own. If we were to force you to become Christians, you wouldn't be Christians. So there's no incentive for us to do that. However, we will push for ideals that come from Christianity, like human rights, like equality, like the right to life. Why? Because everyone will be blessed by that. And that's the mindset I think we need to approach politics with.
Wow. Yeah. I think, we could talk for hours, Jojo, and I would love to, but I want to honor your time as well. And I think that's probably a good summation, and a good spot to start to wrap things up. So, sure. Jojo, you do, what do you guys do at Redeem? You do consultations. I'm trying to remember the website. Consultations, training, public speaking.
Yes. Yeah, so I do a lot of presentations. I get to do podcasts like this. Right now, our biggest issues, obviously, are issues around sexuality and gender identity, because many churches are struggling on how to have a conversation on them. I'm actually writing a book. Hopefully, that will be coming out by the fall. 5 assumptions that Christians need to overcome when discussing issues like LGBTQ. And some of the principles we talked about today, like the second assumption is that love equals agreement. And we assume in order to love someone, you need to agree with everything they say or do. And I point out how many happily married people we know. And I don't know if you guys are married, but how many happily married people do you know agree with their spouse 100% of the time? And usually when I ask my audiences that, only one guy raises his hand, and usually his wife is sitting beside him. but this is the point in terms of our training, is we want to be able to give you practical advice on how to walk through these conversations. But I also do a lot of consulting for churches and Christian schools and universities on how to navigate these kinds of difficult topics. I'm also speaking to a men's reform group out in BC in April, and my topic is on truth, actually, and relativism. How do we talk to people who reject the idea of truth, right? And how do we navigate around that? Because foundationally, you actually have to deal with the issue of truth near the beginning of your conversation, because if you're talking different definitions of truth, you're talking past each other. Right. Yeah. So these are the kinds of activities we do. I do formal presentations. I preach at churches. I've done formal debates, actually, with atheists. It's been fun because a lot of times when we debate atheists, guys, like we talked about, those atheists think they know what Christianity is, but they actually don't. And so they reject something that they don't actually fully understand. And I know this because I'm on their Facebook pages, I'm on their YouTube videos, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, wow, you're destroying a straw man that no one actually believes. And you've accepted the straw man because no Christian has been willing to engage in conversation. So let me wrap up and give you an idea of the kinds of ways we can help, because I think it's an encouragement for your audience. And I'm really glad you're focused on being a steward, because taking and understanding that one of the most important gifts that God has given us to steward are the days of our lives. The Bible says, teach us to number our days. And that means every day God gives us opportunities to interact with people who we may never meet again, or who may know for the rest of our lives, but we have an opportunity to impact in the right kind of way. And I think being intentional about that's the right word, means we understand what a great responsibility it is to represent Jesus in that person's life, to be that living Bible, as we talked about. And I remember I actually was doing a talk on gender identity and transgenderism at a church, a biblical worldview. What does God say about this? I always do my best to show compassion and to show truth at the same time. And a young man came to me at the end of my presentation and he said, "Jojo, I disagree with everything you just said." Right? And I said, great, well, let's go out for coffee and talk about it. And so we did. And we've been meeting regularly ever since, guys. It's been great. And I really enjoyed those conversations, really had a good time speaking to this guy. This guy actually turned out to be transitioning. He grew up in a very conservative Christian home. And he decided he's a woman, and breaking his family's heart, had really tough conversations, really wants to be loved by the family. That really came out. And we began to have conversations over debating the issue and talking about the issue. And we still have huge differences, but we became friends because we began to know each other as human beings. We got that conversation in a way where we were no longer hostile. He was one of them, again, a man of peace. And I remember our second or third meeting, I remember talking to him and having this great debate discussion and said, hey, can we close up in prayer? It's been a great talk. We can meet again in a couple months. I said, sure, let's do that. So I remember closing my eyes, praying for him, praying just for God to give him wisdom and a blessing. And as soon as I opened my eyes, I remember seeing this very large, very angry-looking woman and across the Starbucks stand up and stomp towards our table. And I thought, oh, my goodness, I'm going to be in trouble, right? And so she came right to our table, stood just like towering over him and looking at me. And she had this mean look. And she's like, my partner is transgender and my child is transgender too. And as she's saying this, I'm waiting for the left hook, going like this. And I'm trying to see what I can use to dodge. And the only thing I had left was this empty Starbucks cup. And I'm thinking, Lord, where's the exit? I need to find the exit. Right? And then she said this, guys. She said, I saw you and I saw you were praying for this trans person, and you're the first Christian I've ever seen pray with a transgender person. And I just came here to thank you for being willing to do that.
Wow.
And I thought, wow. And then I realized, oh, wow. Like, how can I be the first? We should be the first people all the time praying for our transgender friends. We should be the first person sharing the truth to them in love and grace, debating them, having great conversations without having to compromise what we believe. It's because we believe this that we should be having those conversations. And I was able to thank her and explain, Jesus would have done this. This is the whole point. But to be able to be that witness because of a conversation I was willing to have, and this young man, God bless him, even though his ideas are still false, was willing to have a conversation with me. Guys, that's a beautiful model about how the church can be different because of the conversations we have. And my encouragement for you is to remember God has placed people around you that I can never reach, that will never talk to me, may not even want to talk to me, but they may want to talk to you, even if you're a real estate agent, right? And that's okay. That's I told you I have to throw one in there. And that's the whole point. God has, in his wisdom, given you those.
There's the left hook right there. It came eventually.
God in his wisdom has given you a platform for your friends, and those friends matter to him. And that's something we should never forget.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us. It's been a huge blessing.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So if you're listening, you can go to redeemingconversations.ca and find Jojo and maybe engage in conversation with him.
Glad
or
to.
Take advantage of what he has for you. So, yeah, thank you so much, Jojo. This has been great. And, thank you to our listeners as well. And until next time.
A somewhat unrelated, steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
If you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To learn more about the show, head on over to twostewards.ca and explore our free resources. To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.
Nailed it.